Hello and welcome to Investor Talk. It's the video series where we speak to the people shaping South Africa's property investment landscape. The entrepreneurs, the investors, the industry leaders who are building real businesses in real estate. I'm Neil Peterson. I'm the founder of Real Estate Investor, and today we're diving into a fascinating story about what it really takes to build and manage a successful property investment business over the long term. My guest today is Jacques. He's the founder and CEO of Grow Properties. And this year marks 15 years since Jacques has launched the business, but his journey in property actually began more than 2 decades ago when he started investing while still studying during the early 2000s property boom. And like many investors, he experienced the excitement of rising markets, but also the hard lessons that came when the 2008 global financial crisis exposed the risks of poor decision making, vacancies, and weak management. So those experiences certainly helped shape the philosophy behind Grow Properties. Property is not passive, it's a business. And over the past 15 years, Grow Properties has evolved from a traditional estate agency built by investors for investors and helping clients move beyond simply owning property to actively managing portfolios for performance, stability, and strength. Okay, so today we'll unpack Jacques' journey, his insights on the South African property market, and the lessons serious investors can learn from building a business that survives market cycles. Jacques, welcome to Investor Talk, and congratulations on the 15-year milestone.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Great to be here. It's a privilege. And yeah, thank you for the amazing introduction. I really look forward to our talk.
Absolutely. So Jacques, we see that Grow Properties is celebrating 15 years in business. Take us back to the beginning. I mean, what problem were you trying to solve when you started the company, and how did your journey as an investor shape the business that you built today?
Yeah, so 15 years ago, I was bushy-tailed and bright-eyed 27-year-old. So I'd gone through one half of a market cycle. So I always tell people you have to go through at least one full market cycle to understand what property is really about. And yeah, back then there was still a lot of pain associated with property. We had bought quite a few properties ourselves before that. A lot of them didn't do really well. And there was a lot of people that had a negative view of property investment. So yeah, the idea behind Grove Properties was to be more than just a service provider. We didn't want to be another estate agency that's just, trying to sell a service. I think it's a very subjective thing, and you're constantly chasing your competitors, trying to be better in a race that I don't think you should be in, to be honest. You should differentiate. So we position ourselves as property partners, to property owners, investors that had done this ourselves. Not a sales machine that was chasing cold calls or chasing, kind of like the traditional sales model. We were professional advisors that understood the real impact that vacancies had, especially vacancies back then, on your portfolio. We'd gone through it ourselves, and we understood, what happened when things went wrong. So the second thing for me was I truly believed that property was still an exceptional wealth creation vehicle, not just financially, but also relationally in terms of building a legacy. Property never goes away. So our viewpoint was that the opportunity lied in the challenges and finding unique ways to actually overcome those challenges, but not blindly setting a strategy and then looking for opportunities that fit into that strategy, and then also having the ability to actually unlock that value where others have failed. When they were caught off guard, you're prepared. So as the saying goes, risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. But at the same time, you need to listen to your clients, understand what their felt needs are, what really drives their motivation to do what they're doing, whether it's selling or buying or investing. And that ultimately shapes the planning behind their property decisions.
Okay. So you often say that property is not a passive investment, but a business. And I mean, after more than 2 decades in the market, I mean, what are the biggest mistakes you see investors making when they treat property as a hobby instead of running it like a business?
Yeah, great question, Neil. So I think things have changed a lot over the years. Investors have a lot more information now than they did, you know, back in the old days, so to speak. However, information alone is not enough to make good decisions and avoid mistakes. So I think the biggest risks actually lie in what you don't know and what you didn't plan for. So like a business, when you start, especially if it's your first time investor or it's your first business, you're often overly optimistic about the numbers. And the main reason is lack of insight into the market dynamics, and lack of experience in property and often just in business in general. So I think another thing that's really, really important to keep in mind is this is real life. So once you start a business, you need to see it through to the end. You can't just swap it out for another business. You can't just stop. You need to either make it work or you need to sell, and quite possibly for a loss. So I think many investors think it's easy to be successful. They're very kind of overly optimistic because of a lack of experience. And you just need to buy a property, and then other people will do all the work, and one day you'll be rich. But yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't quite work out like that. And yeah, the reality is that you are the CEO of your property business. And if you don't think like a CEO and you're too passive, that can also cost you. So yeah, it's often the things that you don't do that have a major impact on the success of your investment. You're also competing in a market with other businesses, with other landlords. So if your offering is not marketed properly, it's not run professionally, it's not up to the standard that the clients, which are the tenants in the market, want, you know, could struggle. The second thing that I've seen is not planning for unforeseen expenses. I think this is a massive one. Again, I'm just going to use the analogy between a business. Often businesses have unforeseen expenses, and often they come sooner rather than later. And I've seen this with, let's say, someone buys a off-plan property, they don't expect to put any money in, and suddenly they're vacant for 2 months. Or suddenly there's extra cost just to take transfer of the unit. So, like a business, those best laid plans will usually underestimate the expenses that actually make the business run successfully. And often that's money that investors don't have. They haven't planned for it. They just wanted to kind of get into the market. And then sometimes you just don't have the money. Now you've got to borrow the money. Now you have to pay debt. That changes the cash flow. The other thing that's very, very big factor is vacancies that take longer to fill, which again, I've never seen that planned into sort of like investment projections for first-time investors, or things like flying to your property that you've just bought to see what the neighborhood is like. You know, what is your plan B if your rental agent runs away because your tenant has become a squatter or they vandalized the property? Do you know people in that market? And I think in business, we understand that things go wrong, and it's a normal cost of business. But in property, often that's not really taken into account. It's always a shock almost, but it shouldn't be. Yeah, the other big one I've seen is investors that invest too far away from home because of cash flow on paper. So without taking into account that they really want to own this asset long term. So they're only looking at the cash flow numbers, but they don't actually really know what they're buying into. So without local market knowledge, and the ability and capital to identify risk and solve problems that come up, you can find yourself in a very tricky situation. If you don't have solid local partners in that market that are honest with you, about the good and the bad elements, you can find yourself trapped in bad investments. You cannot sell without taking a major loss. So I've seen that. I mean, we've also been through that. And sometimes it's very painful to admit that things have gone wrong and now you have to cut your losses. You have to borrow money to pay for a bad investment, which is a very bitter pill to swallow, especially if you haven't been in that situation. And then, yeah, I think the last one, the fourth one I want to share is over diversification from the start. So you go to a seminar, you're excited about investing in property, you have a good job, you have a good pay slip, so you start buying 3 or 4 properties in different sectional title blocks in different areas. But what you have to remember is that every one of these properties have to be managed. You have to keep an eye on your investment. You have to know the financials in those blocks. You have to know the service providers, know the clients, know the managing agents. And I think that's something that people often miss is if you're only going to be making, let's say, 1,000 Rand positive cash flow per unit in year 7, how many of these units do you actually need to make a significant impact on your financial future? So if you want to get to, let's say, like 50,000 or 30,000 Rand free cash flow per month, can you buy 30 or 50 of these units? So ultimately, the business plan is not actually viable from the start. It's relying on things getting better. It's relying on a specific pattern which doesn't always play out. So what I believe in there is, like Warren Buffett says, putting all your eggs in one basket and then watch that basket like a hawk, especially when you start out, so that you can learn the lessons and that you can really adjust quite easily without getting overwhelmed.
Okay.
I'm going to give you one more. Sorry, I've got a long list here,
Okay.
too long, but I'm
Yes.
going to give you one more. This is one that really impacted me personally. I think the last one is that you only have a limited access to credit. So you can borrow so much from the retail banks, and then it starts getting more and more difficult. So if you use your bond ability to buy a few properties initially, just to get your foot in the door, and they don't perform well, you can get stuck. Selling them also has a cost associated with it. And you might want to buy a house for your family to live in. You might get married, and suddenly now you can't buy a house, and you've got these apartments. Now you've got to make tough decisions, and there's an opportunity cost, which is often not taken into account, both lifestyle and financial. So I think you need to think very carefully and take everything into account before you start. A lot of things can change in 10 years, and you shouldn't think that you're always going to be in the position you're in now. Sometimes you sell properties that don't have the cash flow, but they end up being the ones that grew, and you look back and you wish you kept them. And the ones that have the cash flow still have the same rent from 10 years ago, and you wish you sold them. So, yeah,
No,
not
I
the
think
best.
there's some great insights there, Jacques. So let's talk a little bit about the South African property market right now, because from your perspective, working closely with investors and portfolios, what are the biggest opportunities and risks you're seeing in the market today?
Yeah, so for the first question everyone always asks is like, how's the market?
Mm.
So of course the diplomatic answer would be the market is very diverse, and everywhere is different. But I think what is important to keep in mind is, yeah, let's look at the overall market, and then I'm gonna try and identify kind of themes. So let's start with the threats first. So kind of swallow the frog first, as the saying goes. I think the biggest threat is in bad local governance, which we've all seen. So that and lack of service delivery. So areas with incompetent or corrupt local government is very, very high. Um, and often, if you don't have water for multiple days, the roads are collapsing, there's often very little you can do about that as a private investor. So I think that's the number one thing that you need to look out for in South Africa is who's in charge and what are they doing and what's the current condition of the area. The other big risk that we're facing is we are in a very much a pro-tenant, call it anti-landlord legal environment. So it makes it expensive to evict. It makes it expensive to take control of your property. And at the same time, sometimes there's corruption. It's not something often spoken about, but if you do get an eviction order and the city does find alternative accommodation for your tenant, but the sheriff can be bribed, then he won't actually execute on that eviction order. So even in theory, you have the papers the local governance collapse of service delivery or corruption can actually stop that. So that's a very big risk. So I think that's something you have to be cognizant of. There's many laws on paper in South Africa, but the things aren't always the same on the ground. So you have to understand who you're dealing with, and yeah, not going blindly. So that being said, let's look at the opportunities. I think there's a
Sure.
couple of opportunities. The one obvious one or major one is there is a major housing shortage in many of the provinces of South Africa. Similarly, with quality industrial, so especially in Cape Town, there's like a major shortage, which is a very good indicator because industrial means businesses want to trade in this area and there is work. So that means that the local governments that are competent and do deliver services have seen major growth in both prices and rental. So there's a concentration of excellence within South Africa, especially in Cape Town, but there are other pockets as well. So I think that's something that's already happened, but it's important to keep an eye on that because that'll most likely continue. The second opportunity I see is in areas that are generally viewed as very risky at the moment, but the prices have already dropped significantly. So it's a buyer's market. The opportunity is to find suburbs or pockets in those areas that do function and have solved the service delivery problems. Often it's through private interventions. Maybe they have boreholes, maybe they have private security, they have their own services and schools and things like that. And the prices are very low because the area in general is viewed as too risky. So those are also quite unique opportunities, and often you can get good cash flow because the failures of the state don't have to be fixed for those properties to work. They're
Mhm.
already been overcome. The third big opportunity that I'm seeing is unlocking value in existing properties to adjust to market demand. I think it's very, very important to not assume things are going to get drastically better or they're going to get drastically different in the short to medium term. Um, so what's happened is the demand is shifting to smaller units. For example, renting out rooms, renting out smaller bachelor flats, doing a combination possibly of short and long term with furnished properties. Because of new legislation, you can adjust and you can actually combine that, or you could live in the property, only rent it out on holidays. So I think it's quite important to look at the assets you've got and see where there are opportunities to adjust to changing market circumstances. And sometimes there's a bigger opportunity in that than you think. You don't need to have a bigger portfolio to have a more profitable portfolio. So I think that's
Mm.
it's really important to keep in
Okay.
mind.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit about Grow Properties. I mean, you've grown from a small operation into a team of, I mean, more than 20 professionals now. So what have been the key principles behind building the right culture for you, the systems, the people, and also to scale the business over the past 15 years?
Yeah, so a lot of our growth, so I'm going to give you a little bit of background. A lot of the growth has happened in the last 6 years. So for a long time, we were a service provider focusing on investors, focusing on our own portfolio. And we built up a name, but I didn't have the plan to really grow this into a big business, to be perfectly honest. So over time, I started looking at the market dynamics, things started changing, and we basically saw that things are going more online, agents are working more remotely, there's better technology. And then from there, we started with a clear identity in the marketplace. So our slogan says putting people first. So that's really, really important for us is to have a unique purpose-driven property business. That's a place where property professionals can find a home, where the numbers make sense. They get the split they want. That's a good environment. But there's also a heart for the people both inside the company and outside the company. So it's purpose-driven. So I'm going to actually just share our core values because that is literally the core of who we are and what we do. So we have five core values. The first one is company is built on a foundation of faith and it is driven by purpose to serve. So that's almost the foundation, and then the big why, and then the meat of it, the hands, the heart, and the mind is we think like professionals. So that's our mind. We act like business owners. So that's our hands, and we feels like family. So everything we do is about putting people first. In terms of the systems, we've basically been making sure that we align ourselves with service providers that are proactive, that are growing, that are improving their offering, that also have a heart to improve the environment, improve the property sector. So typically, we're not working with the big players. We're working with ones that are here to grow and make a big difference. That take the opportunity to innovate, collaborate, and together we can build something significant. And within that business, there's lots of things that we've made, put in place that are unique. The offering to the property practitioners is very unique. Can earn multiple streams of income. They can get high splits, but they also have some protection in their territories. This portfolio asset management, which we spoke about, where we can pull together an entire portfolio. These are unique offerings that over the years that we've seen the gaps in the market, and we've started to adjust and develop ourselves in that direction, and also build the capacity and the systems to actually back it up to do it effectively.
Right. So finally, looking ahead to the next decade, I mean, what's your vision for growth properties on the one hand? And lastly, what advice would you give investors who want to build resilient property portfolios in the evolving market? South Africa's market is always evolving.
I think it's important to understand that everything is changing all the time. So I mean, the only constant in the world is change. So
Mm.
I think that's really important. So for us, we're just getting started. We're 15 years old. We've been around. I've been doing this my whole life. I love property and I love people. But ultimately, we want to fill a market niche. So we would like to become the number one portfolio asset management company in Cape Town first, and then in South Africa, and then who knows, maybe Africa, because it's a unique niche. We're working in an area where there's almost no one there to meet the client's needs. If you have 5 properties, or you have 50 properties, or you have 200 properties, you almost have to do it yourself. And I think there's a big need for that service. And of course, we'll have to grow and develop as we scale, but we always want to keep it personal. So we want to be big enough to get the job done, small enough to care, small enough to know our clients' names and know our clients' situations, and really grow with them. As they succeed, they're going to do other ventures, they will refer to us. And we've been seeing that happen organically. Or property practitioners that do well, they end up attracting other good people like them that perform, but are also, good people that care and that fit into our culture. So it's very much organic, but at the same time, very much planned where we want to go, who we want to become. We want to become something that doesn't exist right now. So we're growing into our own skin. We're not looking to grab market share off big players or, fight our way into existing markets. And then long term, who knows? Maybe we'll start a fund. I'm looking at that as well. It's something like a big plan that I've got. We also invest ourselves. We've got a portfolio of like over 100 units. And we're also looking at where do we want to invest ourselves. And I'm quite excited about the hospitality sector. So, growing a fund, partnering, being a preferred service provider for maybe offshore clients that want to build portfolios. I mean, we've heard the Americans say, look, they want to invest here. They're looking for opportunities. We must just stop fighting with them. So I think in the next decade, and we want to be a part of that. We want to be trusted local partners, again, in Western Cape and then later Gauteng and beyond. Anyway, so that's
Fantastic.
one question.
Uh-huh.
And then investors, so I think what's really important again is property is a long-term business. So investing in properties like farming with fruit trees, you have to very carefully decide where are you going to plant these trees. And you have to also be very careful in deciding what trees are you going to plant. And you also don't plant 5 different types of fruit trees in one orchard. So I think that's really, really important. So my advice is to really do some serious research about your market, to understand what your own personality is and what your own strengths and weaknesses are. Because if you're the CEO, who you are matters. It's not just, this neutral thing that you're doing. It's something that you've got to enjoy, something you've got to be good at. So if you hate dealing with people, don't run your own Airbnbs because you're going to get one-star reviews over and over, and you're going to hate your life. So that's really important. The third element, I think, is just thinking strategically about your own financial and your personal slash lifestyle goals going forward. So that's always something I've believed in is property is not a separate business. Any business it's there to build legacy, it's there to build wealth for what most of the time for your family. So it becomes a lifestyle thing, it becomes connected to you. So often what makes sense financially won't necessarily make sense for your lifestyle. So I think what's really important is to look at where are the areas that you could significantly benefit maybe an existing business that you've already got or your own lifestyle. If you have a family, you need to live somewhere. Why not use the opportunity to invest in a property where you could live there and rent out other units? For example, maybe you can end up living there for free. Things like that happen, and I've seen extremely lucrative business opportunities within that scope. So that's definitely a dynamic that I would explore. And then, yeah, I think the key is getting the balance right between those three things: your lifestyle slash financial plans, getting into the right markets, and making good decisions that you're going to be glad that you made in 10 years. You're not going to look back and wish that you did it differently. But I also think it's important to not assume things are going to drastically change for the better. So look at the current trends, look at the market dynamics, and invest and create an investment strategy that can work under the current conditions. And then if things get better, there's major growth, there's major progress, that's wonderful. But effectively plan for the worst and hope for the best, and then you'll never be disappointed.
Excellent. I think good way of putting it. So, Jacques, thank you very much, I think, for just sharing your journey and your insights. I mean, it really is a powerful reminder that successful property investing is not just about chasing the next deal. It's about discipline, it's management, and building systems that protect cash flow. And congratulations also on the 15 years
Thank
of Grow
you.
Properties. Built by investors for investors. I like that concept. And
Definitely.
to our viewers, if you enjoyed this conversation, please like, subscribe, and share. I'm Neil Peterson alongside Jacques Revere of Grow Properties. And until next time, keep building smarter property investments.